Throughout our history, the Coast Guard has changed. Our cutters, our people, our name. But through it all, what has remained are the traits found in every Coast Guardsman and woman. Traits of honor, respect, devotion to duty. And though we're separated by time, we are united by a purpose to do whatever it takes to help those in need. And we carry on that legacy, a legacy of all those who came before us, and a legacy that will continue long after we're gone. Because we make history every single day.
And welcome to all of our viewers from across the country, and thank you to those of you who are participating today that we'll meet shortly. Rear Admiral Richard Larrabee.
Throughout our history, the Coast Guard.
There we go. Rear Admiral Richard Larrabee, Rear Admiral Michael Day, and Captain Mark Sinek. I'm Philip Knoll, and joining me today is Gina Panuzzi. I'm the host of They Had to Go Out podcast, where we talk with veterans of the Coast Guard about their most dangerous, daring, and epic sea stories. We're privileged and honored to be part of today's latest installment of the Stories That Matter virtual event series hosted by the National Coast Guard Museum Association. The stories you'll hear today demonstrate the important role of the Coast Guard in our nation's security and exemplify the Coast Guard's motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. I believe our guests and their experience epitomize why we're building the National Coast Guard Museum. Our sponsor and host today, the National Coast Guard Museum Association, is committed to building a world-class museum that will honor the heritage of the U.S. Coast Guard and provide a gateway to discover Coast Guard life. In its 80,000 square feet and 5 decks, our museum will showcase thousands of stories through interactive exhibits, programs, public and private partnerships, STEM-based educational programs, and leadership training opportunities.
The Museum Association will deliver this museum through its When the Most is Expected capital campaign, a public-private partnership. To date, the Museum Association has reached over $79 million in private, state, and federal commitments towards its $150 million goal, and momentum continues to build. We are more than halfway to our goal. The incredible legacy of heroism, bravery, and professional competence demonstrated by this oft unnoticed multi-mission service needs to be understood by American citizens, and the extraordinary work of the United States Coast Guard deserves to be preserved, memorialized, and honored. And currently, it's the only armed service without a national museum. The men and women of the Coast Guard serve many roles that will be displayed in the 5 wings and storylines of the museum. They are lifesavers around the globe, enforcers of the seas, defenders of our nation, protectors of the environment, and champions of commerce. Thousands of stories will be told in the museum, including that of September 11th, boat lift and efforts to evacuate Manhattan by water, the increase in the domestic port mission of the service after 9/11, and the pivoting of the Coast Guard to focus on homeland security to ensure that commercial vessels and cargoes could get in and out of our U.S. ports safely.
Today, we have the opportunity to look back on the tragedy of 9/11, to remember and to reflect, to remember and honor the nearly 3,000 lives that were lost, and to reflect upon the heroism and bravery of those who defended our nation and defined the spirit and service of the Coast Guard. Our guests will discuss the chaotic scene in Manhattan on the morning of September 11, 2001, as the planes hit the Twin Towers in a devastating terrorist attack, causing more than 500,000 to flee towards the water, looking for any way off the island and away from the World Trade Center. They'll provide personal accounts and stories as they remember and reflect on this tragic day that changed our country forever. If you have any questions, I encourage you to send them to us via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. As we begin today's discussion, I'd like to first introduce you to Admiral Richard Larrabee, who was director of the Port Commerce Department of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and was in the first tower as the plane hit. Welcome, Admiral Larrabee.
Morning, Chief. I can't seem to get our video to work. There we go. All right, good morning. Thanks, Chief, and thanks to the museum for setting this up today. I want to sort of set the stage for what I want to talk about for a couple of minutes. For me, having had just retired from the Coast Guard and joining the Port Authority, kind of found myself on the other side of the response equation that morning. After 34 years of being part of the people that responded, I found myself in a situation that all those people that you mentioned before found themselves in. For me, 9/11, first of all, was a day that all of us remember where we were that day. No matter where you were when that first plane hit, you can remember that spot that you were in. Secondly, that the stories that you're going to hear from people who are directly involved are all different. All of us experienced something different that day. And for those of us that survived, I think we are grateful. Luck, in my mind, had an awful lot to do whether you made it out or not. And in my case, I was lucky on several occasions. The event that we're going to talk about today, for me, was personal. Having been at the Port Authority for about a year, I got very comfortable with the people that I worked with that day, and had a great deal of trust in their judgment and what they had been doing. On that morning, which I remember as being from a weather standpoint, clear, with a sort of a hint of fall in the air. We found ourselves in our offices on the 62nd floor of World Trade Center 1. And when the first airplane hit that tower, we had no idea what had happened. We heard a loud explosion. When we looked out the window, we could see flaming debris and paper floating in the air. The building actually rocked and things fell off desks and people were jolted. But again, not knowing what had gone on, we found ourselves sort of in a little bit of a daze and a quandary. I will say that as a result of most of the staff in the Port Department having been involved in the '93 bombing of the World Trade Center, you didn't need to tell people to get out. And very quickly, the staff evacuated the space and started down a stairwell. There was no panic. My recollection was that all of us had thought about the fact that even an airplane, if it hit the building would survive. And that was a kind of a basic premise that all of us had in our heads. So there was no panic. The stairwell was sort of filled with smoke, but the lights were still on. And what took about 45 minutes to descend to the main floor, I have a clear recollection of firemen ascending the stairs with all their gear. And that's a picture that I'll keep in my head forever. When I got down, I ran into the chief operating officer of the Port Authority. I quickly made a phone call to my wife and said I was okay, and that he and I joined several of the other senior members of the Port Authority staff in trying to decide where we would go and where we would set up a command center. Suddenly, while we were standing in the lobby of the Vista Hotel, we heard a loud rumbling noise, an explosion, and then it went dark. I fell to the ground, someone fell on top of me, and we laid there for what seemed to be an eternity. It got eerily quiet. And once it stopped, the individual who I couldn't really see, he and I began to work our way out of the building. At one point, I remember looking up and seeing a traffic light and realizing that I was now on West Street. The other individual that I was with turned out to be a New York City fireman. We eventually shook hands. He went one way and I went the other. At this point, I think dazed, confused, and probably in shock, I started to make my way south. And here again is where I was lucky. I became part of literally tens of thousands of New Yorkers trying to get away from the World Trade Center, trying to find some way to escape. And I finally got to the point where I realized where I was and began to head towards the Coast Guard's Battery building in Lower Manhattan. I saw a familiar face. Commander Ed Siebold was standing there at a fence, behind the fence. And I approached him and said, Ed, it's Rick Larrabee. It's Admiral Larrabee. Can you let me in and give me a hand? And I think Ed, because fear was in the air that day and he wasn't really sure what was going on, sort of took me aback. And he said, I need to see some ID. And I remember very clearly thanking myself that I had picked up my wallet with my Coast Guard ID in it, because that cleared things up. He took me in. They allowed me to take a shower. I got a set of Coast Guard coveralls, and in horror, we watched the second tower, which was Tower 1, fall. From that point, I was given a ride by the New Jersey State Police, and I went back to Port Newark. And as I departed the Battery building, it quickly became apparent to me that a large evacuation was taking place. That evacuation involving tugs, ferries, all sorts of vessels. And I'm going to let Mike Day talk a little bit about that. But just to finish my thoughts, I went back to the office. At this point, I was alone. All of the Port Commerce staff had spread out all over. And I found myself sort of alone in Port Newark. The good news was that the staff around us at our facilities had been thinking, and they had been very quickly putting together what they knew was going to be our next step. We needed to get the Port Commerce Department back to work. We needed to help get the port reopened and find our people. We had a clear mission over the next 3 days. Find everyone, find a place for them to get to work, and then eventually, with the help of Admiral Bennis and the staff at Activities New York, find a way to first convince ourselves that we could put procedures in place to open the port, and then eventually to convince the powers to be in Coast Guard headquarters and in the security community that we could safely open the port. So, you know, for me, it was a day of extraordinary efforts by a lot of people. There was a feeling of wanting to help. And I think from my standpoint, the reaction on the part of Activities New York, on the part of the maritime community, is something that I'll always be very proud of. Let me end it at this point, and we can come back with any questions, but let me turn it over back to you, Chief, and to Admiral Day.
Admiral, an incredible story. I love how you ended up at the Coast Guard building down in the park. That was my favorite part there. But incredible story. Thank you for sharing it.
Our next guest is Rear Admiral Michael Day, who was then a lieutenant and was designated the Coast Guard on-scene commander for the evacuation of Lower Manhattan, coordinating the response of over 100 civilian vessels to evacuate that area of the city. Welcome, Rear Admiral Day.
Afternoon, everyone. How are you? Pleasure to be here, and thanks. So where to begin? That morning, I was in the command center, just finishing up the morning brief. The reason I was in the command center was that a lot of the senior leadership was actually out of the office that day. When the first tower was struck, we thought it was just a commercial helicopter or a small plane. No one really recognized it for what it was. And a 41 UTB was sent out just to monitor the scene and see what was going on. As the second plane struck, we obviously knew something more was going on. And we started to take an inventory of what we had available. As the tower fell, we lost all of our antenna and ability to communicate with the 41. The cloud of smoke caused the VTS camera on Governor's Island to be obscured, so we really couldn't see what was going on. So I was just sent out with the sole purpose of relaying information from Lower Manhattan to back to Activities New York at the time. We went out. I actually had a meeting scheduled at the World Trade Center that morning with the Port Authority for 10 that morning, and Andrew McGovern from the Sandy Hook Pilots was there and offered use of the pilot boat New York, recognizing the capabilities that come with the Sandy Hook Pilots, the knowledge and port, the radios, and just the proximity to Activities New York. Grabbed a couple of things walking out the door. First was a OpSale 2000 book. And the reason we grabbed that was it had a lot of homework done in it, if you will. It had staging areas. It had where ambulances could be posted. It just had a lot of information, points of contact. Evacuation at the time wasn't contemplated, but nonetheless, it was one of the key things that felt we grabbed. As the pilot boat proceeded to Lower Manhattan, there was the evacuation had started. We just saw basically chaos between the boats. Small boats were speeding around. There were people actually in the water swimming for Brooklyn or New Jersey. When the tower fell, also the New York Police Department and Fire Department's antennas were also on the tower. So the last command that the police department had was to secure all the bridges and tunnels. There were no subways operating, so it was really impossible to get out of the out of the battery area. And it was just, the vision was obscured. There was a gray cloud over everyone. So seeing a few of the ferries, just how crowded they were, we decided we could call on the radio for all available boats in the area that wanted to help with the evacuation, report to Governor's Island. That was done as someone as a staging area. Had no idea of how many of the maritime public would respond to that call, if anyone. We get busy doing. We dropped off a lieutenant at the battery building. We did ask him to bring back a Coast Guard ensign so that we could fly over the pilot boat. We dropped some marine inspectors off at various ferry terminals, and what they were there to do is just to help show the Coast Guard presence there, and they were instrumental. I understand the statute of limitations is up now, but in vessel overloading, for example, there are certificated vessels to carry a certain number of passengers. It wasn't a question of how many are you certificated to carry. It was how many do you think you can safely carry. And so we were able to really maximize the use of those boats. And as Admiral Lavery said, it was a very calm day on the water that day, and the weather was it was really an incredibly day for weather. So as the day progressed, more and more vessels were responding. One of the moments I remember, I was on the radio nonstop talking and directing vessels to all over the place, in probably the most inefficient manner. I had them crisscrossing, going from the Hudson side of Manhattan over to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn to New Jersey. And there was a chief, a BMC Jamie Wilson, who probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves, who just casually came up to me and said, "Sir, why don't you put these vessels, the responding vessels, on a route, if you will, point A to point B, and you never have to talk to them again." That one single act, it increased the efficiency so much more, because as more and more vessels would come in, we had 6 or 7 different routes, if you will. It was just point A to point B type of transit. But we were able to take smaller vessels out of the queue and then add larger vessels in, again, which increased the efficiency overall. So I just want to make sure I gave Chief Wilson a shout out. He's now actually a civilian in Sector Houston, Galveston, so still serving our nation. So this back and forth went on. I remember one of the frustrating parts of the day was many frustrating parts, but was we were getting calls from Liberty Island that they had hundreds of ambulances standing by to transport the injured. And we were on the radio asking, for the injured to be transported, and at one point taking account and no one coming back with injured. And it was so odd to fathom, because you could see the destruction and the damage ahead of you, but yet, no injured to speak of were there. And then going on, through the day, there were a handful, but there were what I call secondary injuries, firefighters or someone hit by a car, that type of, or ran into a pole. But they weren't, the injuries that we thought, that we were hoping for at the end of the day. The pilot boat New York was instrumental, I think, in response. We set up, I'll call it a barrier patrol, going from South Street Seaport up to North Cove at a very slow bell and back and forth, coordinating, because again, to Chief Wilson's point, by making it very clear and easy evacuation, it freed us up to do that patrol and send other vessels where we saw more and more people migrating to along the seawalls or different terminals. As it progressed, we tried to get the ferries back into their slips, rather than, because they were designed many times for those specific slips. So getting the right vessel into the right place, and so that went on for 8-9 hours until there was virtually no one left at the seawall, or anyone that wanted off, I'll say. By that time, the Brooklyn Bridge had opened up and people were able to walk across, which was far better. But with the path knocked out in New Jersey, it was really the only way to get over there. I do want to say, the boat lift has gotten a lot of attention, with the 20th anniversary, but I think equally important that what the maritime community brought was capacity. After that, the boat lift, everyone, we use this capacity, and there's a picture on the screen now, to transport items from New Jersey to North Cove. That became a staging area. We brought doctors, nurses, steel workers. Oxyacetylene was actually one of the premier commodities, because at that point, they were still trying to cut steel and debris away to rescue survivors. So having the ability to bring these supplies, even food and water, was also instrumental. Another prime thing that the maritime community brought was fuel. You wouldn't necessarily think about it, but the leadership of the FDNY was lost, and there were a number of fire trucks that were drafting out of the Hudson River, and they were all in series in place, going from one pumper to the other. And as they started running out of fuel, they had no way of resupplying those fire trucks. But the tugs were donating their fuel to those fire trucks. And I can remember, people with those big gallons of water, the 5-gallon things of water, just to get it going until we could set up some type of conveyance to move it. It was also the decommissioned fire boat John Harvey that it wasn't operating because it was a museum basically, and one of the tugs had a coupling that they donated to the fireboat that enabled it to keep pumping. Because if you think about it, these firefighters were there were a number of fires throughout the area when the plane went through, and other buildings, hotels had caught on fire. There were rooms on fire. And there were firefighters actively engaged in it. So to run out of firefighting water in the middle of a response would have potentially jeopardized the lives of additional firefighters. So if I've said I in this at all, I mean we, and I speak about the whole maritime community and the Port of New York. And I think I'll stop there for now, pending any questions. Thank you.
Admiral Day, thank you for sharing that incredible story of just Americans coming together. Thank you.
Admiral Day, I just have to say that, the radio call that went out, all available boats report to Governor's Island, it still gives me chills. So if anybody out there hasn't heard it, make sure you watch some videos of that after this. But just wanted to echo incredible story. Hey, up next, we've got Captain Mark Sinek, the current sector commander of Coast Guard Sector New York. The current sector commander was planning to be with us today, but due to duty was unable to join us. So instead, we're pleased to welcome the deputy sector commander, Captain Mark Sinek, who will reflect on the changes made by the Coast Guard since 9/11. Captain, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much, Chief. First of all, yes, Captain Merchant sends her regards and her regrets. She's actually attending a House Committee for Homeland Security roundtable discussion to talk about the post 9/11 Coast Guard mission and collaboration landscape. Not too different than what I'm going to talk about here today. But before I start, I'd just like to thank our other panelists for sharing their personal stories. I'm very humbled to be here to talk about an organization I love and an organization that they obviously love as well. And I appreciate their past and their continued contributions to the safety and security of our nation. So thank you very much, gentlemen. So I'll start off with just an overview of the sector command and the role in a large scale event. The pre 9/11 operational footprint for the Coast Guard was contained within groups and marine safety offices. The groups were largely search and rescue and law enforcement focused, and then your marine safety offices were marine safety and the regulatory piece. The interesting piece about New York specifically was, you heard it, there were activities, which was kind of a hybrid of the pre-sector time. And again, as we moved into the post 9/11 world, with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the Coast Guard created these major operational field commands called sectors, as you all know. And the neat thing about those sectors were it took all of their authorities and put them under one hat, all right, under one command. And the reason that's valuable is it gave the ability to more seamlessly respond to instances that impacted the port, and it made it easier to do that. Those authorities are the Captain of the Port Authority, the Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator Authority, the Federal On Scene Coordinator, the Federal Maritime Security Coordinator, and then finally the officer in charge of marine inspection. All right, and again, so what it did is it makes it easier now for us to cross those lanes. So in a large scale event today, these authorities, and more importantly, as you've heard everybody mention here, our interagency relationships fostered within the landscape of these authorities really make our operations and our responses in our exercises that we practice today much more effective. And to get into the changes since 9/11 specifically, you see some of the photos going across the screen, and I'm going to hit on some of the regulatory stuff that changed, but the long and short of it is that we just became a more effective and a more integrated service. So fundamentally, the pre-9/11 Coast Guard still exists for the most part today. We're still multi-mission capable, with a focused effort on search and rescue and prevention, response missions, and law enforcement. We've always done those, and we're going to continue to do it. But what really changed was our shifted focus on those legacy missions to one of having a particular heightened awareness of the threat to domestic ports and in maritime commerce by bad actors. We really never really thought that would be a thing here. So that was the fundamental difference. And the bottom line is, over the past 20 years, our priorities changed quite a bit, and we shifted from a primary focus of safety, all right, to a focus of security. And I look at September 11th as our watershed moment. It changed the way we thought about and how we respond to threats. The easiest way to illustrate this is probably to give you a few comparables real quick. Prior to 9/11, cruise ships and terminals, were required to establish security plans. However, those plans weren't particularly robust, and really that there was no particular level of detail of what we were, what they were trying to protect themselves from. Post 9/11, with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and the establishment of the Maritime Transportation Security Act, MTSA, as we all know it, those security requirements changed significantly, and so did the security landscape. MTSA created an umbrella security posture for the maritime transportation system to include security plans covering national, regional, and then down to the facility and vessel security plan level. It enabled better coordination of actions to be taken, and also it gave us a vehicle to share information across our stakeholders. Additionally, it paved the way for international security enhancements through the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, ISPIS. MTSA created our MARSEC levels. So now there was a way for us to systematically move our maritime security posture with industry up and down, so that we were all lock and step. So that was a huge change. MTSA also implemented the requirement for the transportation worker identification credential, TWIC. This was a way to verification process for individuals that had access to secure areas at vulnerable parts of the maritime transportation system. So those are just, again, you go from we did a little bit of stuff pre 9/11 that was well intentioned to really turning it up with MTSA and the creation of Homeland Security. Again, just a couple other quick things. 9/11, the pre 9/11 advance notice of arrivals were different. It was just a not too short of an honor system where they would fax in their sheets of when the ships were arriving with no crew list. Post 9/11, it's a much more coordinated effort with our intelligence and our customs communities, and it's also a 96-hour notice ahead of time. As far as port congestion and how we manage the port, in response to 9/11, our vessel traffic service, as most of that's kind of the air traffic controller of major ports. We expanded it, and we managed to manage the additional security measures. Specifically our VTS here in New York, we manage 5,000 deep draft vessel transits a year. We manage over 700,000 commercial vessel transits. We carry 50 million passengers and move $500 billion worth of commerce, but that's what our VTS does. And in the post 9/11 world, we really used that specific capability we had to really tighten up and control how the port worked. And again, speaking of intelligence, prior to 9/11, the Coast Guard, didn't have a unit intelligence program. Now we have sector intelligence programs where operations are actively involved with not only our intelligence staffs, but also our partners, through, the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We're linked in with them, and plus a host of routine professional exchanges. Our Coast Guard intelligence enterprise has grown significantly post 9/11, and has developed a comprehensive approach to, from everything from systematically screening merchant vessels from coming either coastwise or internationally, to developing local targeting networks with our partners to manage security concerns within the port. So that's, speak a lot, I've touched a lot on how our mission and our people have changed post 9/11. But I'd like to wrap up my opening remarks with focusing on how our partnerships have changed. Pre 9/11, the Coast Guard was somewhat siloed. I was at a group, and it wasn't necessarily in a bad way. It was more of a cylinder of excellence, I guess would be a better way to capture it. But we had our missions to do. We knew we had to work with partners. We were really good at what we did. They were good at what they did, and we worked together when we had to. But after the events on that day, we morphed strategically into the nation's new Homeland Security mission. This was with the implementation of those new security regulations and requirements, and the threat of more complex incidents and events. We had to work together with a more whole of government approach to our duties. And one of the ways that we did that was under the Federal Maritime Security Coordinator hat, those authorities, specifically in our Area Maritime Security Committee. Those were established in 2002 when our leaders realized that our risk profile had significantly changed. We had unique vulnerabilities within our critical infrastructure and key resources, and we needed to work in this shared government approach to protect them. And standing up these committees was the underlying key to ensuring our partners were engaged collaboratively with not only industry but our other agencies as well, and working together to secure the ports of specifically here in New York and New Jersey, as well as Albany, and the ports nationwide. So that was our area maritime security committees were a large piece of that. And again, before I close out, just to give you a little bit of a perspective in New York here, an interesting note specifically on our critical infrastructure footprint. Sector New York possesses almost 40% of the entire nation's critical infrastructure and key resources. The other 36 sectors in the country combine for the remaining roughly 60%. So that's just to give you an idea of us locally here, how we look with that. Again, in closing, post 9/11 Coast Guard has transformed into a much more collaborative leader in security, within the ports, with a unique ability to work in the multi-agency as well as the industry environments, just in an effort to protect the nation and our economic interests. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll leave it back over to you, Chief. But again, I can't thank our other panel members for everything they've done. It's impressive to be here to speak with them today. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. Thanks for the remarks. Yeah, to call it a watershed moment, being a pre 9/11 coastie myself, it definitely changed after that day, and that was all the way in San Francisco. So great perspective, Captain. Thank you.
And thank you all for the great questions that came in for our exciting panel of guests. Rear Admiral Richard Larrabee, Rear Admiral Michael Day, and Captain Mark Senek are ready to respond, and we'll do our best to get through all of your questions.
And hey, everyone, if anybody has any more, just keep firing them away, and we'll get through them. Admiral Larrabee, the first question's for you, sir. After everything that you saw that day and experienced that day, what's your biggest takeaway?
Looking at it, Chief, from the Coast Guard's perspective, I can say with great candor that the Coast Guard is that force that people rally around in an event like this. I spent 15 years in the port, worked with numerous captains of the port and numerous staff members. Events like Sandy, when you think about those and the role that the Coast Guard plays, this whole story that we've tried to tell today, I think, comes into focus. I remember the night that U.S. Airways flight landed in the Hudson River, and that same group of people that responded on 9/11 responded to that event. And Captain Sullenberg did a great job landing that airplane, but it was this same port community that responded without being told, and was able to save all of the crew and the passengers on that airplane. So the role that we play, the coordination, this notion of creating partnerships, for me, That has been strengthened since 9/11. And if there's any good thing that came out of 9/11, it was this notion that in a port like New York and New Jersey, and I suspect around the country, that the community of people that works in the port every day has a tremendous amount of trust in the Coast Guard, has a tremendous amount of willingness to participate, and is always ready to help. And I think that's one of the big takeaways.
Phenomenal, Admiral. Thank you for the reply. Admiral Day, we've got one for you, sir. When you were out there that day, what was your first thought? Were you, did you feel overwhelmed? Did you feel like the Coast Guard had a handle on this? What was your initial reaction, I guess, since you were on scene and the man that was required to make it happen?
Yeah, no, it was overwhelming to see and just to hear. I had this background. I had done what's called an industry exchange program. I worked at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for a year, 1998. So I thought many of my coworkers had perished. There was no communication. So I was heartbroken at knowing so many people or thought at that moment in time. And just seeing I remember thinking it was our generation's Pearl Harbor, that attack. I didn't think we had it under control. It was, like you said, it wasn't a plan executed, as more an action evolved, if that makes sense. I do want to say too, I want to mention the role of command climate and empowerment and how important that's been to me. And that credit goes to Admiral Dick Bennis and Captain Pat Harris, who were very, very influential. I'm still junior in my career, but they set that environment of risk-taking, calculated risk-taking, of doing what's right. So I kind of, even though I didn't have the comms with the activities at the time, I kind of knew in my heart that this was what I was supposed to be doing at that moment in the time. And had not they created that culture that allowed that calculated risk-taking, that I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened, but I think it certainly made me feel empowered in taking those actions. So I do want to put that out there. So thank you.
Excellent, Admiral. Thank you for the reply. I loved in your presentation, one of the first things you mentioned was that an evacuation was not contemplated. But then all of a sudden, that's what you're faced with, and the Coast Guard and yourself pulled it off. So thanks for that, sir. Captain Sinek, we got a question more into the modern day now. If a large cargo vessel was headed into the port of New York, New Jersey, and didn't submit its 96-hour notice of arrival, how would the Coast Guard react?
Well, thanks for the question. Several different ways. Again, if it was a cooperative vessel that gave us that didn't meet the window, we would find out why it didn't meet the window. We would conduct the required security inspections on it, and we would make it wait if it was consistent with what would be beneficial to the port. We'd make it wait. Again, if you're talking about an opposed vessel coming in and not stopping, well, that's where our Area Maritime Security Committee comes in, and we use the whole of government approach to thwart that incident. But it actually happens more often than you think, and it is there are fines levied with it if we think it's anything nefarious or it's more commonplace with that particular vessel. But again, it is something we take very, very seriously. And those requirements are for not only just our larger commercial traffic, our merchant ships. It's anything over 300 gross tons, and so some of your mega yachts and that also fall under that requirement. So.
I love it, Captain. Basically, we're not going to let it happen again, is what I took from that. So thanks for the reply, sir. Admiral Larrabee, we had one for you again, sir. How do you think that we best ensure the Coast Guard's readiness 20 years from now?
I spent 34 years in the Coast Guard. and I had the unique opportunity to spend another 15 years working with the Coast Guard. I'm always amazed at how quickly this organization can shift from one focus to the next. And I think what Admiral Day talked about in terms of command climate is really an important ingredient in that. We put a great deal of trust into our people, and we trust them to do the right thing. And that trust, I think, is part of the relationship that exists between the maritime community, the community that I joined after leaving the Coast Guard. And I watched over that 15 years the incredible people that came through Activities New York. Couldn't have been more proud of them. And I think from my perspective, the willingness of an organization to do what people like Mike Day did that day, their confidence that they're doing the right thing will shift. Today, port security has gone from somebody trying to steal a new Land Rover off the dock to now being a mission that's totally refocused. That has happened not just because of some laws and regulations, but I think as a result of people understanding that the focus and the risk has shifted. And that to me is the great strength of the organization. That the people in the Coast Guard are empowered to get involved in things that they know they need to pay attention to. And the end result is an organization that is capable of shifting at any moment.
Excellent, Admiral. Bias for action and always adapting. It was a great tribute there to the Coast Guard. Admiral Day, put the same question out to you that we put to Admiral Larrabee at first. What is the most important lesson or the most impactful lesson that you feel you took from that day?
I think we stand on the shoulders of past Coast Guardsmen. I think you mentioned that call out on the radio. There wasn't all available boats help Mike Day. It's all available boats. This is the Coast Guard. And just the long history of the Coast Guard in New York and just the standard that we bring, I think, it's a hallmark of great relationships. And although by chance I was there on that day, I also believe any other lieutenant or petty officer there in the same situation, same circumstances would have come to the same conclusion, made the same decisions. And I think that, to your question, looking to the future, it's going to be our people that are going to help guide us. One of the things I value about the Coast Guard, we're an adaptive, innovative organization that can change quickly. I mean, in this case, we changed in a day, right? The structure and what we did. Admiral Lloyd talks about taking the cutters off of counter narcotics and bring them back into the ports. There are not a lot of organizations that can pivot in such a short period of time. And, I don't know the challenges of the future, but I do know that our people are going to help us get through it. And again, you talked about the bias for action. It's our culture. It's our DNA. It's who we are. It's what we do. We're there to protect the people of our nation, to help. And I'm highly confident that no matter what the challenge, the people of the Coast Guard will rise to it.
Here, I don't think you can top that. Go ahead, Admiral.
I want to interject just one thought from what Admiral Day said. Knowing the history of the Coast Guard, knowing the history of the Coast Guard in New York as an example, you get a much better sense of why people trust us. And this notion that the museum is trying to tell that story and help people understand that the role that we play, I think it's so critical to what we're doing here today. This is a story that needs to be preserved. The event itself will be replaced by others, but I think the consistency of this organization, the unique capability to shift like this, is really something the American public needs to hear more about. Whether it's Hurricane Katrina or 9/11 or a variety of other scenarios that had never been thought about before. We do an incredible job of adapting and getting our people out there and doing the right thing. And I think that's a story that needs to be told.
For sure, Admiral. As you said, basically anything with the federal interest that happens out there is a Coast Guard responsibility. So if it happens on the water, the Coast Guard touches it somewhere. Captain Sinek, we'll turn to you. Captain, did Admiral Larrabee had previously mentioned that everybody remembers where they were on 9/11. Where were you?
Interestingly enough, I was holding my son for the first time. He was born on 9/11 when I watched the first hour fall on TV. I was stationed on Long Island, and I was at Port Jeff. So that's where I was. And then my pager went off, and yes, pager, that's how long ago it was. My pager went off, and then I went into work. So.
And I'm assuming you have a lot of official duties probably on 9/11. So is there any birthday cake in his future that day, or do you guys like push it to the 12th?
There was not. My next day off was my birthday.
Fair enough.
Which is February 7th.
Well, panelists, I'll open it up to anyone who has any closing thoughts. We're almost to an hour, and if anyone has anything else that they want to express to the audience, I'll give you the opportunity to do so.
If I could, Chief, I just wanted to make a comment on something that both Admiral Larrabee and Admiral Day touched on as far as empowerment. You know, I worked for at that time, Captain Day. This is my 4th job I've had here at New York. And I got to tell you, the empowering your people to do things, and when we know things are going to change, we know things are going to become difficult, and you have 3 choices. You can either do nothing, or you can complain about it, or you can be a part of it. All right, and I got to echo. I could not echo more what Admiral Day said about empowering people to make well-intended mistakes. It's okay. So anyways, thank you for that time. And I just wanted to make sure that I was able to foot stomp that for the group.
Loved it, Captain. I wrote that down right here. Do nothing, complain, be a part of it. Perfect. Admiral Day, just before we go, sir, just wanted to see what would you be most excited about when the museum's finally constructed and you're able to walk through those doors? Any particular exhibit? You can't pick 9/11. It's got to be something else, but any particular exhibit you would want to check out especially?
I think I like the strike team. I was a former strike team CO. I kind of like seeing what they do a little bit. I think another great asset of the Coast Guard, and talk about a response-oriented a group of individuals. So for me, I think the strike team section would be fascinating.
Awesome. I hope they're taking notes, Admiral, and they get that level A gear that everybody can put on. They said it's interactive, so it could be a lot of fun.
Great idea.
Admiral Larrabee, what about you, sir? Do you have any particular part of Coast Guard history that you're going to want to visit most in the museum? Again, you can't pick 9/11.
So I think about some young man or woman that is looking for a future and a career. And the takeaway from going through what I think the museum is going to tell is that this is an extraordinary organization, an organization of smaller than the New York City Police Department. And when you think about the fact that this organization is serving all over the world today, is serving in 11 different missions, and is doing it with a force of people, as Admiral Day has expressed, that is empowered to do the things that they need to do every day without somebody leaning over their shoulder and telling them what to do, I think is the takeaway that I'd like to have those young people feel. At the same time, I'd like to have some taxpayer look at this organization and say, for the dollars that I put into this organization, we get an extraordinary payback. And I think whether you look at one of these exhibits or the other, they all collectively tell that story.
Well, great. Thank you so much for that, Rear Admiral Larrabee. I appreciate all of you and your participation today. I know that 9/11 was one of the main reasons that I joined the Coast Guard, and I know that that goes for thousands of other young Coasties as well. So it was amazing. Thank you, both Rear Admiral Larrabee, Rear Admiral Day, and Captain Sinek for your participation today. We are thrilled that you were able to join us. And for those of you online, thank you for sending in your questions and just being a part of this today. The Museum Association, its supporters, and those of us who have served are so excited about the building of this museum, helping to create a place to honor the Coast Guard, its people, and what it does for our nation. We rely on supporters like you to get involved and spread the word. So tell your friends about this project and why it matters to you so much.
And I'll echo Gina. I hope that you guys all enjoyed today's discussion. I invite you all to learn more about the National Coast Guard Museum Association at coastguardmuseum.org. That's coastguardmuseum.org. You can sign up for their newsletter, visit the museum on social media at the links on your screen to stay up to date on its progress. We invite you to reach out to us with any questions or answer our call when we reach out to you. Remember, we cannot have a Coast Guard museum without your help. Finally, we hope that you'll take a moment this weekend to remember those that we lost 20 years ago in this tragic attack on our nation, and to think proudly about the brave men and women who responded in any way that they could to help those in need. Thank you again. Semper Paratus.
Thanks, Chief.